Yes, we are doomed. Well, since this might be the end, I have a few secrets to share.
If there's one thing Mick Jagger has never been afraid of, it's speaking his mind. Bold, unapologetic, and famously hard to impress, Jagger ruled rock and roll with a confidence no one could touch. In his prime, he wasn't just setting the standard, he was the standard. And throughout it all, he rarely gave out compliments, especially not in the world of rock. But time has a way of softening even the hard-hearted legends. Now, at 81, the Rolling Stones frontman is reflecting on the artists who truly left a mark, and he's revealed the 6 women in rock who genuinely blew him away. Some of these names will absolutely surprise you. Janis Joplin. Even though Janis Joplin and Mick Jagger were often pitted against each other in the 1960s and reportedly butted heads on more than one occasion, the truth is, behind the scenes, Jagger deeply admired her. For someone famously hard to impress, especially when it came to fellow performers, he couldn't help but be drawn to Janis's wild energy, raw talent, and that voice, gritty, electrifying, and utterly unforgettable. She wasn't just a force, she was a phenomenon, and Mick knew it. Janis Joplin didn't just break the mold, she crushed it under her boot heel and lit it on fire. Dubbed the first queen of rock and roll, she didn't try to fit in. She demanded to stand out. Her voice was singular, unpolished but powerful, full of ache and abandon. She sang like every word cost her something. That rawness, that vulnerability wrapped in fire made her magnetic not just to fans but to legends like Jagger himself. Born in 1943 in the conservative town of Port Arthur, Texas, Janis was never meant to follow the rules. She was the misfit girl in a buttoned-up world, mocked for her appearance and ridiculed for being different. She read philosophy, painted, listened to blues records, and gravitated toward beat poetry and outcasts. By high school, she was already rebelling, wearing men's shirts, speaking her mind, and refusing to fit into the quiet, polished role expected of young women in her town. The pain of being an outsider never left her, but it also became the fuel that powered her rise. Before the fame came, Janis was already walking and talking like a star. Once, she reportedly strolled right up to Bob Dylan and announced that she was going to be famous one day. His reply? Casual and prophetic, "Yeah, we're all going to be famous." She also never pretended to be anything she wasn't. When asked during an interview why her band didn't include any women, she fired back that if someone showed her a good female drummer, she'd hire one. But until then, she didn't need the extra competition. Janis liked being around men, and she wasn't afraid to admit it. Even growing up, she challenged every expectation placed on her. Her siblings and childhood friends recalled how early on, Janis figured out that if you rocked the boat, people noticed. And so, she rocked it. Loudly, constantly. She never had formal vocal training. Her parents had wanted her to be a school teacher, but Janis had other ideas. She began singing at 17, self-taught and unstoppable. She sang for free beer in Austin bluegrass bars and joked that she'd hit folk clubs just for a laugh. She had no idea her untrained voice would one day become the gold standard for female rock vocalists. She was fluid and fearless. She dated men and women not to shock, but simply because she followed her heart and her desires. According to those close to her, she wasn't trying to make a statement. She was just being honest about what she felt in the moment. Her musical heroes were legends. She spoke about Aretha Franklin and Billie Holiday with reverence, calling their voices subtle and soul-shattering. But it was Otis Redding who truly lit the fire in her. Watching him perform at the Fillmore left her shaken, inspired. She hoped that maybe, if she just kept singing, one day she might reach that level of emotional truth. Her loyalty ran deep. When her close friend and occasional lover, Peggy Caserta, got stuck in traffic on the way to Woodstock, Janis didn't wait. She sent a helicopter to go get her. Because if Janis was going to set the stage on fire, she wanted her people there to see it. Even her death didn't stop her from giving back. In her will, she left over $1,500 for her friends to throw a party. No funeral gloom, just drinks, laughter, and rock and roll. The note was simple. The drinks are on Pearl. That was what they called her. Pearl. The friend, the rebel, the legend. And when she sang Me and Bobby McGee, a song written by Kris Kristofferson, she turned it into something else entirely. Something painful, beautiful, unforgettable. When Kristofferson heard her version after her death, he broke down. because in her voice, you could hear every road she'd traveled, every rule she'd broken, and every part of herself she'd poured into that final note. That's what Mick Jagger saw in her. Not just a talent, but a trailblazer, a woman who never apologized, never backed down, and never tried to be anyone but herself. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, but she impressed everyone, even the ones who were hardest to impress. Tina Turner. In 2023, the world lost an icon. Tina Turner, the indomitable queen of rock and roll, passed away at 83, and the outpouring of grief was immediate. Tributes rolled in from every corner of the globe. Angela Bassett, Roberta Flack, Martha Stewart, and countless others honored her legacy. But among the most heartfelt came from her longtime friend and musical counterpart, Mick Jagger. The Rolling Stones frontman called her a wonderful friend and remembered her as an enormously talented performer and singer who had supported him when he was still finding his own feet. There was no mistaking the affection in his words. This wasn't just professional respect. There was history here. Real, electric, unforgettable history. Long before she conquered the charts with What's Love Got to Do With It, or brought stadiums to their knees with Proud Mary, Tina Turner was Anna Mae Bullock, born in Nutbush, Tennessee in 1939. She picked cotton as a child and sang in the church choir. Life wasn't easy. Her parents split when she was young and she was largely raised by relatives. But even back then, that voice was unmistakable, raspy, thunderous, and soaked in soul. She found her way to St. Louis as a teenager, where she met Ike Turner, and from there the transformation began. With Ike, she became Tina, and with Tina came a fire the world had never seen. Her stage presence was feral, her voice a force of nature, and her legs insured for millions. She didn't just sing, she exploded. That explosion caught Mick Jagger's attention early. In the 1960s, the Ike and Tina Turner Revue opened for the Rolling Stones on tour. Tina described it as fun and fantastic, recalling the moment a young Mick Jagger barged into her dressing room unannounced and blurted out that he loved how the girls danced. Tina didn't know who he was yet, but that moment would be the beginning of something that spanned decades. It's often been rumored that Jagger's now legendary dance moves were lifted straight from Tina's playbook. He's long disputed it, claiming his mother taught him to dance and that any similarities were purely coincidental. But Tina saw it differently. She once remarked, with a sly edge, that Jagger never gave her credit. According to her, she and the backup dancers had worked with him behind the scenes, teaching him how to do the pony, breaking down the rhythm step by step in dressing rooms between shows. He might not have copied her consciously, but it's hard to miss the influence. Because Tina didn't just dance, she commanded. She moved like a storm in heels, with a swat that made it impossible to look away from. Mick may have claimed the spotlight, but it was clear that when Tina shared the stage, he had to work to keep up. And share the stage they did, over and over again. Turner opened for the Stones during their 1981 U.S. tour. The pair duetted live on explosive renditions of Honky Tonk Woman, Jumpin' Jack Flash, and It's Only Rock and Roll. In 1985, they delivered a now iconic performance at Live Aid in Philadelphia. Then again in 1989, she joined them on stage for their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, one of the final times they performed together. Few women could match Jagger's energy toe-to-toe. Fewer still could outshine him. But Tina did both. And yet, what made her unforgettable wasn't just the talent, it was the joy. Her ability to make everything feel fun. As she wrote in her 2018 autobiography, My Love Story, performing with Mick had always been a thrill. From the early days when she taught him to move to their later shows filled with laughter and wild chemistry, every memory was golden. Even just weeks before her passing, Turner gave an interview confessing that she had always had a crush on Jagger. In 2021, she'd posted birthday wishes to him on Facebook, reminiscing about the thrill of sharing a stage. Mick, in turn, responded in kind, calling her inspiring, warm, funny, and generous. So why did Mick Jagger love Tina Turner? It wasn't just the voice, or the dancing, or the legacy. It was her fire, the way she turned pain into power, the way she claimed space on stage and refused to give it back, the way she survived, then soared. Tina wasn't just a performer, she was proof that you could lose everything, rebuild from the ashes, and come back stronger, louder, and more dazzling than ever. To Mick and to the world, she wasn't just the queen of rock and roll, she was the heartbeat of it. Stevie Nicks. Stevie Nicks has always been more than just a voice. She's a force, a vision, a spell you don't realize you've fallen under until it's too late. With a career that stretches across decades, heartbreaks, reinventions, and reinventions of reinvention, she remains one of rock's most magnetic figures. Part mystic, part poet, and entirely original. Born in Phoenix, Arizona in 1948, Stephanie Lynn Nicks grew up moving from town to town as the daughter of a corporate executive. By the time she hit high school in California, she was already writing songs and harmonizing with her grandfather, singing old country standards with a dreamer's heart and a rock and roll soul. She met Lindsey Buckingham in her senior year, and the two began performing as a duo. That relationship, romantic and musical, would go on to shape the sound of a generation. By 1975, Nicks and Buckingham were invited to join Fleetwood Mac, and everything exploded. Their first album together, Fleetwood Mac, went triple platinum. Their second, Rumors, became one of the best-selling albums of all time. Behind the scenes was chaos, breakups, tension, betrayal, and mountains of cocaine. But on stage and in the studio, Nicks spun gold from emotional wreckage. Her songs like Dreams, Sarah, Landslide, and Gypsy were vulnerable, cryptic, and cut-to-the-bone personal. She turned pain into poetry and fans into followers. And Mick Jagger? He noticed. There was something about Stevie that couldn't be taught. She wasn't flashy like Tina Turner or confrontational like Janis Joplin. She didn't need to belt her power, she conjured it. Jagger, who was notoriously particular about who he shared a stage with, invited Nicks to perform with him during the Rolling Stones' 1981 tour. Not many women could hold their own next to him, but Stevie did. She didn't try to match his energy, she pulled him into hers, that slow burn, that controlled chaos, that whisper that sounded louder than a scream. In her words, she once recalled the experience with sly satisfaction. She and Jagger had undeniable chemistry on stage. She joked that he flirted but never pushed past the edge because he knew she didn't have to chase anything. She already had the room in the palm of her hand. He admired that, and while he never said it outright, everyone could see it. Mick Jagger liked women who didn't just survive rock and roll but rewrote its rules, and Stevie was one of them. And she didn't stop at Fleetwood Mac. In 1981, she released her solo debut, Belladonna, which went straight to #1. That album alone included Edge of 17, Stop Draggin' My Heart Around with Tom Petty, and Leather and Lace with Don Henley. She was proving something, not just to the world, but to herself, that she could stand completely alone and still cast the same spell. Her influence has rippled far and wide. The Chicks covered Landslide in the early 2000s, introducing her to a new generation. Destiny's Child famously sampled Edge of 17 on Bootylicious. And artists like Taylor Swift, Sheryl Crow, Vanessa Carlton, and even Harry Styles have openly drawn from her mystical aesthetic and confessional lyricism. Eminem, of all people, reportedly played Rhiannon on repeat. Proof that even rap gods bow to the witchy queen when necessary. She's just as iconic in appearance as she is in sound. At 5'1", she built her presence with layers. Shawls, velvet, lace, platform boots, and scarves. She once explained that she didn't do casual well. Even in everyday life, she was in cashmere, head to toe, body and mind. During the height of Satanic Panic, when her all-black wardrobe sparked rumors of witchcraft, she pivoted. For years, she wore only creams, pastels, and soft greens. Not out of fear, but to protect herself from stalkers and accusations. Then, as always, she reclaimed her power and returned to the black she loved. Because Stevie doesn't stay in anyone else's box for long. She's also no stranger to the camera. She's appeared on American Horror Story, performed in documentaries like Destiny Rules, and made cameos as herself in shows like Up All Night. In 2014, she mentored young artists on The Voice alongside Adam Levine, offering insights not just on music but on resilience, survival, and self-worth. Beyond the stage, Nicks channels her influence into activism. In 2008, she launched the Stevie Nicks Band of Soldiers Foundation after visiting wounded American troops. She wanted to give them what she always leaned on: music. During her recent tour, she waved the Ukrainian flag and spoke about her deep respect for soldiers who fight for their homes and freedom. Stevie never married, not really, never had children, and never apologized for living life on her own terms. Her relationships were often tangled and intense: Lindsey, Don Henley, and Joe Walsh. Her drug use in the 70s and 80s nearly killed her. She got clean, fell in love again, and fell out. Through it all, the music never stopped. She wrote through every high and every hollowed-out moment. She's always embraced the shadow just as much as the light. That's why people still show up decades later to listen, to cry, to be reminded that the magic is real, that the ache can be beautiful, that heartbreak is a doorway, not a dead end. It's why Mick Jagger respected her. It's why he wanted her on his stage. Because Stevie Nicks doesn't just perform, she haunts. Chrissy Hynde. Chrissy Hynde didn't walk into rock and roll. She barged in, guitar in hand, and didn't ask permission. With a voice that could flicker between biting and bruised in a single breath, she became one of the most magnetic frontwomen in the history of the genre. And she didn't get there by being nice. Before she was Chrissy Hynde of the Pretenders, she was a girl from Akron, Ohio, born in 1951 and raised on Elvis Dylan and the British invasion. While her high school classmates were off dreaming about weddings and white picket fences, Chrissy was sketching rock gods in her notebooks and plotting her escape. She landed in London in the early 1970s with a passport, a passion, and no backup plan. She worked at NME, floated around Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood's punk fashion scene, and played with a string of bands that never stuck until the Pretenders. By the time the band dropped their debut album in 1979, Chrissy wasn't just another frontwoman, she was the whole damn show. That first album didn't ask for attention, it grabbed it. With tracks like Brass in Pocket, she made sure no one could ignore her. She wasn't pleading to be special, she knew she was special, and she delivered every lyric with that gritty, unaffected contralto that sounded like it had been forged in cigarette smoke, heartbreak, and stubborn resolve. Chrissy didn't have a trained voice. She was proud of that. She once claimed the best voices in rock weren't sculpted by teachers but shaped by years of frustration, anger, insecurity, and just sheer stubbornness. You could hear it in her singing, not polished, but real, not perfect, but unforgettable. Her stage presence was equally disarming. There was no persona, no fluff, just Chrissy in a leather jacket gripping her guitar like a weapon. She didn't sugarcoat her feelings or soften her edges, and audiences felt that. She was vulnerable, but she never begged for sympathy. She could stand dead still in the center of a stage and make the room feel like it was holding its breath. Her lyrics weren't built for mass anthems. They were sly, often understated, capturing moods and moments, not slogans. But that's why they stuck. She wrote like someone who was trying to make sense of the world while refusing to let it tame her. Even when the lyrics were aching, there was steel underneath. It didn't take long for the industry to notice. Madonna once said that watching Chrissy perform in Central Park in 1980 gave her courage. She remembered thinking, "There's a woman with balls." Not metaphorical ones, real ones, because Chrissy wasn't just surviving in a man's world. She was making her own rules inside it. And somewhere along the way, she caught the attention of Mick Jagger. It's not hard to see why. Jagger liked women who didn't chase the spotlight. It followed them naturally. Chrissy didn't flirt with it. She glared at it, daring it to look away. And that kind of presence, that's the kind of woman who earned Mick's respect. She had swagger, but it wasn't borrowed. She didn't mimic the boys. She carved her own path through the noise. She wasn't afraid to challenge egos either. Around rock legends, she held her ground. She moved like she didn't owe anyone an explanation. For a man like Jagger, who built a career on confidence and control, Chrissy's ability to match that energy without ever bowing to it had to be electrifying. Despite lineup changes, personal tragedies, and the whiplash of the industry, Chrissy never quit. She kept writing, touring, and pushing forward. And she never softened her core to stay relevant. In 2023, Rolling Stone ranked her among the 200 greatest singers of all time. A long overdue nod to a voice that's been defying expectations for over 4 decades. Chrissy Hynde was never trying to be your idol, your crush, or your muse. She was too busy being her own blueprint. And that's exactly why people, especially people like Mick Jagger, couldn't look away. Patti Smith. Patti Smith didn't just show up in New York. She arrived like a lightning bolt, ragged and radiant, with a pen in one hand and a fist in the other. Long before she was crowned the godmother of punk, she was a poor girl from the industrial edges of Chicago, born in 1946 to a Jehovah's Witness mother and a machinist father. Raised in the gritty sprawl of New Jersey, Smith had no illusions about the world. By the time she was in her teens, she had traded Bible verses for Rimbaud poems and soul music for Bob Dylan, and she was already convinced that art could be a kind of salvation. She moved to New York in 1967 with nothing but a suitcase and determination. She slept in parks, worked in bookstores, and met Robert Mapplethorpe, the then unknown artist who would become her greatest muse, roommate, and lifelong confidant. The two of them were inseparable, young, broke, hungry, and completely committed to beauty in all its forms, even the dangerous ones. It was in the Hotel Chelsea, that breeding ground of misfits, geniuses, and beautiful disasters, that Smith came into herself. She wasn't just writing poetry, she was performing it. Her voice was untrained and unfiltered. Her phrasing jagged like broken glass. She brought a punk attitude to literature and a literary depth to rock and roll, and people felt it. She once said that distinctive voices in art come from frustration, fear, loneliness, arrogance, and sheer perseverance, never from a teacher. She wore that philosophy like armor. In the early 70s, Smith lent her words to anything that moved her. She collaborated with Blue Oyster Cult, painting strange, mythic lyrics onto their songs like Sigils, Baby Ice Dog, Career of Evil, and Fire of Unknown Origin. She acted in underground plays, scribbled out manifestos, and gave performances that felt more like exorcisms than entertainment. By 1974, she had stepped into music full force, performing with guitarist Lenny Kaye. The two built something raw and electric, poetry welded to distortion. Their first single, Hey Joe Piss Factory, split itself in half, one side reimagining a rock standard with a spoken word homage to Patty Hearst, the other a defiant recollection of Smith's time on a factory floor in New Jersey. It was more than just music, it was revolt. Her debut album, Horses, hit in 1975 like a cold slap across the face of the rock world. Produced by John Cale of the Velvet Underground, the album was wild, confrontational, and poetic in a way no woman had dared to be on a record before. Cale described her as someone with a volatile mouth and said their recording sessions were like two immovable forces colliding. It was worth it. Horses didn't just chart, they changed the blueprint. The cover photo, shot by Mapplethorpe, showed Smith in a white shirt and black jacket, looking like she didn't give a damn about your expectations. She didn't. Jagger was drawn to women who didn't orbit men. Women who built their own mythology, who stood on stage and made the ground shake. Patti wasn't a traditional beauty, and she didn't try to be. She was cerebral, visceral, and untamed, qualities Jagger knew too well in himself. There was a rumor once that Jagger offered her a chance to open for the Stones in the mid-70s, and while she didn't take it, the interest was real. She had a magnetism that didn't pander. She didn't need the room to like her. She just needed the room to listen. That alone was intoxicating. In 1978, Smith released Easter, her most commercially successful album. It featured Because the Night, co-written with Bruce Springsteen, a love song that somehow still sounded like it could burn your house down. More hits followed, Frederick, Dancing Barefoot, and anthems laced with both vulnerability and rage. But she wasn't chasing fame. She famously stepped away from the spotlight in 1980 to build a quieter life with MC5 guitarist Fred Sonic Smith in Detroit. Even off stage, her influence seeped everywhere. You could hear her spirit in Blondie and Susie Sue, and even in early Madonna. Smith didn't market herself as a feminist figure, yet she embodied the very idea of what women in music could be, limitless. She once brushed off the label entirely, saying too many women got hung up on their gender or identity and forgot to just create. To her, art was the only label that mattered, and maybe that's what Jagger saw too. A woman who didn't want your approval, just your attention. A woman who wore her intellect like a blade and her voice like a flare in the dark. Patti Smith didn't just sing, she declared. She didn't entertain, she challenged. And she never asked for space. She carved it out with her bare hands and dared anyone to tell her no. For a rock world still saturated in ego and spectacle, she was a reminder that power doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just speaks with terrifying clarity and waits for the room to catch up. Debbie Harry, Blondie. Debbie Harry didn't just lead Blondie. She was Blondie, even before the band had a name. Long before she was a global pop icon, she was just a Jersey girl who wanted something more. Born Angela Tremble in Miami and adopted by a working-class family in Hawthorne, New Jersey, she was raised on radio hits and post-war suburbia. But the moment she discovered music, she knew she wasn't meant for a quiet life. She once recalled that the first voice that ever made her feel something was that of Dusty Springfield, honeyed and aching. That's when she knew she wanted to sing, and she wanted to make people feel. She moved to New York in the late 60s, floating between art scenes, waitressing at Max's Kansas City, and even working as a Playboy bunny, all while soaking in the city's grit and glamour. Debbie didn't just observe the underground, she lived in it. She did time in a girl group called The Wind in the Willows, worked odd jobs, and slept in the back of rehearsal spaces. Her looks turned heads, but her attitude stopped people in their tracks. She wasn't playing blonde, she was weaponizing it. In 1974, she met guitarist Chris Stein, and the two formed what would eventually become Blondie, a band that started in the same dingy, electrified CBGB circuit as the Ramones and Talking Heads. At first they were dismissed, too pretty, too pop, not punk enough. But Debbie didn't flinch. She said the only thing more boring than punk gatekeeping was men who thought they invented rebellion. Blondie mixed genres like cocktails, punk, surf rock, disco, and rap, and made hits that sounded like they came from the future. By the late 70s, Debbie Harry had become something entirely new, the first female face of punk that didn't need to prove she was tough. She just was. Blondie's sound evolved with her, from the snarl of Ex-Offender to the sleek shimmer of Heart of Glass. That song alone broke boundaries, a punk band releasing a disco hit in 1979, unheard of. But Debbie made it make sense. She gave disco an edge and gave punk a groove. And Rapture? The first #1 song in America to feature rap vocals, delivered by Debbie herself, slinking through lines with deadpan cool, name-dropping Fab Five Freddy and Grandmaster Flash before most of America even knew what hip-hop was. She didn't ask permission to cross genres. She just did it, in stilettos and with a smirk. Her influence is unmistakable. Madonna studied her. Garbage honored her. Lady Gaga borrowed her blueprint. Even Eminem once rapped that Blondie's the reason for half this shit asterisk. The Killers, Franz Ferdinand, and Paramore, they all took notes. And the fashion, Debbie Harry basically made vintage lingerie and peroxide hair a rock uniform. She wasn't trying to look perfect, she was trying to look like herself. And she did it so well it became iconic. And someone like Mick Jagger? Of course he noticed. Jagger had built his own myth on swagger and sex appeal, but Debbie had both in a way that flipped the gaze. She didn't perform for men, she performed men, exaggerated them, outdid them, made fun of them, and made them want her all at once. She once quipped that being a woman in rock was like being a drag queen with real breasts. You had to be twice as sharp to get half the credit. Her confidence wasn't bluster, it was earned. She wrote her own lyrics, controlled her own image, and didn't soften anything for the cameras. She could share a stage with Bowie, with Iggy Pop, or with Jagger himself, and never once look out of place. Jagger respected that. There's something about a woman who doesn't try to impress you, yet somehow does, without lifting a finger. Debbie Harry has always been slippery by design. Punk, but not really. Pop, but never polished. Feminine, but never fragile. She was the blonde bombshell who snuck in the back door and rewrote what women in music were allowed to sound like, look like, and be. And while Blondie has had its breakups, comebacks, and reboots, she's never lost her edge. In 2017, Pollinator proved they still had plenty to say, still pulsing with the cool defiance that made them famous. Debbie Harry never asked to be a role model, she just lit the path. And legends like Mick Jagger, they didn't just admire her, they got her. Because she didn't just play the game, she changed the rules. Which name on the list shocked you the most? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.